So, on the night of April 11th, 1981, in a small resort town in Northern California, 4 people were brutally murdered inside Cabin 28. A mother, her teenage son, his friend, and a family acquaintance, all found bound, stabbed, and beaten to death. But here's what makes this case truly haunting. The mother's 12-year-old daughter and 2 younger sons were asleep in the bedroom next door. They heard nothing. When they woke up the next morning and walked into the living room, they discovered the scene. 40 years later, no one has been charged. This is the story of the Keddie Cabin Murders. Keddie, California is a tiny mountain resort town in Plumas County. In 1981, the Keddie Resort was a collection of small cabins where families could rent cheap housing. Glenna Sue Sharp, known as Sue, had moved into Cabin 28 with her 5 children after separating from her husband. She was trying to rebuild her life. On the evening of April 11th, Sue's oldest daughter Sheila, who was 14, went to a sleepover at a neighbor's cabin. Sue stayed home with her other 4 children: John, 15, Tina, 12, Ricky, 10, and Greg, 5. John had a friend over that night, Dana Wingate, also 15. The boys were hanging out in the living room while Sue prepared for bed. Tina, Ricky, and Greg were asleep in the bedroom. Sometime after 10 p.m., someone entered Cabin 28. What happened next was one of the most brutal crimes Plumas County had ever seen. The next morning, Sheila returned home around 7:45 a.m. She opened the front door and walked into a nightmare. Her mother Sue, her brother John, and his friend Dana were dead in the living room. Their bodies were bound with electrical cord and medical tape. They had been stabbed repeatedly and beaten with a hammer. A steak knife was found bent and stuck into Sue's body. Sheila ran screaming to the neighbor's cabin. Police arrived within minutes, but what they found made no sense. The bedroom where Tina, Ricky, and Greg had been sleeping was untouched. The 2 boys, Ricky and Greg, were still asleep. They had heard nothing. No screams, no struggle, nothing. But Tina, the 12-year-old daughter, was missing. Police immediately feared she had been taken by the killers. The Plumas County Sheriff's Office launched an investigation, but from the beginning, things went wrong. The crime scene was contaminated. Evidence was mishandled. And despite the brutality, investigators seemed unable to follow obvious leads. Within days, 2 names emerged as suspects: Martin Smart and John Bubiday. Martin Smart lived in Cabin 26, just next door. Bo Bubiday was his friend staying with him. Both had violent tendencies, and both had been acting strangely. A counselor told police that Marilyn Smart, Martin's wife, had confided that Martin confessed to being involved in the murders. Marilyn was terrified of her husband, but the sheriff's office did nothing. A hammer matching the murder weapon was found near their cabin. Neighbors saw them acting paranoid and leaving town. Still, no arrests. 3 years later, in 1984, a skull was discovered 50 miles from Keddie. It was Tina Sharp. Someone had taken her that night, held her, and killed her. Her body was never fully recovered. Despite this, the case went cold. Martin Smart died in 2000. Bo Bubiday died in 1988. Both took the truth to their graves. In 2013, the case was reopened. Sheila Sharp had fought for decades for answers. New investigators were stunned by how poorly the case was handled. They found evidence that had been ignored or lost. In 2016, retired detective Mike Gamberg discovered the original sheriff may have deliberately sabotaged the case. There were rumors Sheriff Doug Thomas was involved in drug trafficking and that Smart and Bubiday had connections to him. Gamberg also found DNA evidence from the crime scene had never been properly tested. In 2018, investigators announced they had a DNA match to a living suspect, but have not named that person. The case remains officially unsolved. To this day, no one has been charged. Sheila Sharp continues to demand justice. Cabin 28 was demolished years ago, but the memory of what happened there still haunts Keddie. If this case shocked you, hit subscribe for more unsolved mysteries. Do you think the sheriff covered it up, or was it incompetence? Let me know in the comments.